The information is also available on our website at predictivesolutions.com. So today I'm going to be talking about data collection is really what the topic is today. As you can see, it's in the new user primer, but as Kent said, it's appropriate for existing users as new users. So let's get into this, and here are the things that I want to cover today. I want to go over an overview of what SafetyNet's all about. What is the purpose? Why are we doing what we're doing? I'll go through some goals and expectations as to how we get data into the system, which will lead us into the counting rules and process. We'll talk about how to perform inspections. We'll go through the website navigation, how to get in online. And then I'm going to do a mock inspection using one of our demonstration zones, walk you through how to do an inspection, talk about some tips. I'm not going to do the mobile versions, iPad or Android, but I will show you under resources where you can look at videos and get tutorials on how to do the inspections on a mobile device. When I do the online tutorial, I will talk about the differences on a mobile device. So real quick, who we are. We've been around as a company since 2001. Our previous company name was DBO2. Our company name changed in 2008 to Predictive Solutions. Our software has been the same. It's SafetyNet. And one of the things that we see over and over again is as inspections and observations go up, that's these blue lines, incidents go down. And we see it so often that that is our logo, is inspections and observations, incidents go down. But talk a little bit about how that's done. One, just simply doing inspections and more inspections doesn't necessarily do everything. You have to also act on the information. But let's talk about how safety is done and what I'm going to talk about today and what I'm not going to talk about today. So first, safety is done through people, process, and technology, or people, process, and tools. I'm going to talk about the tools, certainly SafetyNet. Talk about the process, what are the best practices to get the information in so that the data will reflect what you want it to and so that the numbers make sense. What I'm going to talk very little about, though, today is the people side of it. That's the culture, the leadership, the accountability, the feedback. I'll talk briefly on it, but I'm not going to go in a lot of detail on the people side of collecting observations. So your culture has to align, your leadership has to be engaged, and the responses to the data have to be appropriate in order to get more data to act upon. So let's talk about why we do SafetyNet. And to me, this is one of the most fundamental and most important concepts behind SafetyNet. You may recognize the Plan, Do, Study Act as a continuous improvement loop brought to us by Deming. He was a quality guru after World War II in Japan, and he brought it back to the United States as well. And the Plan, Do, Check Act, or Plan, Do, Study Act, has been incorporated into a lot of the new safety management systems. OSAS 18001 and ANSI Z10, those safety management systems now incorporate a Plan, Do, Study Act. But let's talk about how this applies to SafetyNet. So first, we talked about as inspections go up, incidents go down. So the purpose of SafetyNet is actually an accident prevention tool. So if you want to prevent injuries, we need to get ahead of the injury, find out what the precursors are to those injuries, right, and then identify them early enough that we can prevent them before they lead to an injury. So again, the purpose is we want to prevent injuries. So the expectations are, let's go out and look at items in the field, at hazards in the field, and let's talk about look at what are those hazards and are we following our plan, yes or no, right? So really the expectations are to evaluate the difference between the plan, that's your health and safety plan, and the process, what you're really doing out in the field. Then you have to have a plan to use the data. Don't just collect the data. A plan would be, or for example, if I just collect data like I'm my weight on a scale, if I don't use that information to help me lose weight, I'm not going to lose weight, right? So I need to have a plan to use the data. And then I need to communicate to everyone within the organization why we're doing what we're doing and what we can do to address that. So I think that leads to the do piece. So the do piece is I'm going to develop an inspection strategy. That means I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at the right things and the right people are collecting data and things like that. And we'll talk about inspection strategy in detail a little bit later. And then I'm going to do my initial observation. For example, I spot a hazard, not wearing safety glasses, or a guy standing on top of a ladder, and I do my initial correction. Hey, get off the ladder. Hey, put on your safety glasses. Okay? So most people stop there. I call that the plan, do, hope, pray method. I hope and we pray nothing bad's going to happen, right? I also call that the whack-a-mole process. We're just going out and we're whacking moles. What we need to do next is to see what is that data telling us. We need to study the information we're collecting. We need to periodically review it. We call that a data use plan, where you're going to frequently look at the information being collected and act upon it, right? So the data use plan introduces the study act piece to SafetyNet. And the purpose is you're going to identify gaps and trends. A gap would be something I'm not looking at, right? That could be a contractor. That could be a item on my checklist that I'm not looking at. And a trend would be something I'm seeing that I may not like, right? I see a high number of hazards in fall protection, for example. What am I going to do to address that, right? And then the act is I'm going to act on those gaps and trends, fill in the gaps, put an action plan together to make the trend go in the direction that I want it to go, okay? So that leads to the action, providing feedback, both positive and negative, to contractors, to your project teams, to your management, to the observers, right? Develop an action plan to address gaps and trends. Then ultimately, let this data make your data-driven decisions, right? Do I change my health and safety plan? Do I change how I buy out my contracts, things like that? And this is a continuous improvement loop. So as I develop progress, right, and my trends improve, new trends will develop, and I need to change my inspection strategy to reflect targeting different items, okay? So that's the Plan, Do, Study Act. That really hinges why we do what we do. How are we trying to drive improvement using SafetyNet? And again, this is an accident prevention tool. So let me give you a little insight, all right? If my inspection strategy doesn't target specific hazards, and I review my data and it says all we're looking at is hats and safety glasses, right, or PPE, then the only thing I'm going to prevent is PPE-related injuries, right? If I'm not looking at fall protection, I'm going to be hard-pressed to prevent fall protection injuries, right? If I'm not looking at slip, trip, and fall or material handling ergonomic issues, I'm not going to be able to prevent those injuries. So consider that when you review your data. Consider that as you collect your data, and we'll talk about how you can do focused inspections. All right. So real quick, one of the things I want to talk about briefly is some of the positive things about collecting data. One is the more people collecting data, the better. The more diverse your team, not just safety people collecting data, right? And then finding unsafe observations is a positive thing, right? We have too few unsafe observations per inspection. We see that tends to yield a high number of injuries at a project. Too many unsafe observations can be bad. That means you're identifying hazards but not addressing the root cause, right? So we've actually found the lowest risk is finding a moderate number of unsafe observations per inspection on average, right? So you get a high level of engagement. You find and address the unsafe observations at the interim steps and at the root cause, right? And if you want more information about the best approach, look at our white paper on our Predictive Solution website, and you'll be able to find more best practices on the balanced approach. But let's get into the nitty-gritty, which is how do I go out and collect observations? So I want to go over a couple goals. One is make sure your organization, at the very least, from a metric standpoint, identifies if people are observers, do they have a minimum engagement, right? Because it's going to be hard to say, hey, yes, you're doing the right number of inspections if you haven't set some kind of expectation ahead of time. This is typically what we see. If you have a full-time safety person at a job site, they're doing at least one a day, 3 to 5 a week minimum. Line supervision, that's a foreman, a supervisor, shift supervisor, somebody like that, typically see 1 a week on average. Some companies do more, but typically 1 a week is what we see. And then upper management, that'd be like a plant manager or even the C-suite, like a CEO or somebody like that. Usually they're doing 1 a month. That's typically what we see as far as goals and expectations, right? Most organizations, too, have some kind of worker engagement, and that's kind of hit and miss on because different workers do different inspections. Not that same worker doesn't necessarily do 1 a week or 1 a month or however many. They kind of group it out for workers. But the more engagement you get, the better off you are. But I want to go into detail, though, that inspections can vary, because this can be misconstrued often as we roll out SafetyNet, especially to safety folks first, and they go out and they do what I call a general inspection. A general inspection is when you go out and you look at anything and everything. Could be any hazard. Could be fall protection, excavations, scaffolding, electrical, housekeeping, PPE, whatever. Anything and everything, you're going to stop and evaluate it, right? And sometimes you're going to look at the entire facility or a big part of the facility, and your inspections could take a very long period of time. As you start to get more people involved, right, that's great for safety folks to continue to do general inspections. But the expectation for non-safety folks should not be they have to go out and look at anything and everything all the time. The more people you get involved, the more you can break up inspections into bite-sized chunks, right? Make it a 5 to 10 or 5 to 15-minute process, and you're going to be able to get greater engagement, right, more widespread engagement, and a more sustainable process. So let me give you an idea of what focused inspections could be. A focused inspection could be, hey, I'm looking at a specific area of a facility or a project, right? A single floor, a single work area, right? Or a single contractor or crew, right? Or an observed party, right? It could be a line on a manufacturing line. It could be a single company like, hey, we have forklift drivers. I'm going to go out and look at just them, right? Or I'm going to go out and look at my maintenance team because they're kind of scattered all over the place, and if we don't pin them down or follow them, nobody's going to end up looking at them, right? I could look at a specific category, right? So I'll give you a great example on a focus inspection. When I used to do general inspections, the only time I would think to look for fall protection would be if I saw hot work, right, sparks or open flame type welding, cutting, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't think to stop and look for a fire extinguisher, you know, for example, in construction, we needed one every 3,000 square feet. Every 3,000 square feet. I know when I did a general inspection, I didn't stop every 3,000 square feet and say, hey, where's the fire extinguisher, right? I typically only look for one when I needed one, right, when I saw hot work. So a good example of a focused inspection at a category level would be fire protection, specifically a subcategory, which would be fire extinguishers, and you have somebody go out and look at just for fire extinguishers. Put the blinders on, and that's all they go out and look at. You know, in a manufacturing environment, that could be eye wash stations, that could be fire extinguishers, that could be housekeeping, it could be, you know, blocked aisleways, blocked exits, electrical panels, anything like that would be a good category, right? And especially if you see a gap, hey, there's a category we're not looking at enough, make sure you have people go out and do focus inspections in those areas if you have a high amount of work with those hazards, okay? So make sure you have a good group of general and focused inspections, right, that make up the bulk of the observations coming in. It shouldn't be all just general, it shouldn't be all just focused. It should be a combination of them. So utilize your people, your safety folks and your non-safety folks, to get a good breakup of general and focused inspections. And again, if you want sustainability for non-safety folks to be engaged on a routine basis, make sure you incorporate these focused inspections. I have a great focused inspection blog article in Safety Carry if you want to dig into that a little bit deeper. All right, so let's get into, once you start going out and doing inspections, I want to go over some specific rules. The first is, let's talk about the difference between what inspection is and an observation. Now, understand, I'm going to be using terms that are default terms within SafetyNet, okay? Inspection and observation. Your terms may differ. Some people use assessment, some people use audit, some people use observation and findings as opposed to inspection and observation. But an inspection is basically a collection of observations, right? So an inspection is one or more observations. So let's talk about that. Within an inspection, you can collect safe observations, right? And then when you collect unsafe observations, right, it asks you for more details, right? Specifically, we're looking for the severity of the findings. So I'm going to go into detail, best practices for collection of safes, and then best practices for collection of unsafes and severity. So I'm going to go through those right now. But I want to make sure you understood an inspection, when I refer to it, is just a collection of observations, safe and unsafe observations. All right, so the first things first is, why do we collect safe observations and how do we collect safe observations? Well, the first things first, I'm going to jump right to this last bullet, right? OSHA has a saying, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So a safe observation is your opportunity to say, on this date and this time, I looked at this area, this observed party, whether it's a contractor, a crew, a department, or whatever, and this task or hazard, right? Fall protection, housekeeping, what have you, right? If all we did was looked at unsafe observations, right, you're going to have a very incomplete picture because you're only finding what's wrong. You're not documenting what's right. And at the end of a month, let's say, you had 0 unsafes in fall protection. Could you safely say, yes, we're safe in fall protection? Because a 0 could mean one of two things. A 0 could mean, yes, we're working safely in fall protection, or nobody went out and evaluated fall protection. Because a 0 could mean one of those two things. So we want safety assurance, and safe observations gives us assurance that we went out and we evaluated it, okay? So did you look at the issue, yes or no? On average, within SafetyNet, we see about 30 to 35 safe observations for every unsafe observation, okay? So on average, if you look at all the data, 250 million observations in SafetyNet, we see about 50-plus safe observations unsafe, on average, right? So if you look at every inspection ever done, we see about 50 safes per inspection. That's a lot of opportunity to say, I went out and looked at that. So make sure, if you're not doing it today, that you're utilizing safe observations. Now, let's talk about the best practices with regard to collecting safes. One, don't count everything, right? I just need a ratio of what's safe versus unsafe. Is it 1 out of 2? Is it 1 out of 10? Is it 1 out of 50? Is it 1 out of 100? That's a big difference, right? If I'm 1 out of 100, it's not nearly as bad as 1 out of 2, okay? So make sure your ratios represent the difference between safe and unsafe. You get a good ratio, okay? But again, don't count everything. Once you start to get out there and you see, hey, everybody's wearing their hard hats, quit counting hard hats and go look at something else. Okay, you got a good ratio, okay? The other thing, the reason we want safe observations is we don't want to be the whack-a-mole safety cop, right? We don't want to be the enforcer out there trying to enforce the rules. We want to let people know when they're doing things well, when they're not, okay? So the best practices, we want safe observations so that we can get a ratio of safe and unsafe so that we know, are we looking at the issues? So that's the collection of safe observations. The next thing is, how do we count observations? And this is very key, right? Consistency is going to be the way in which we can evaluate one project from another project, one facility from another facility, one observed party, crew, contractor, department from another, right? It also is going to help us evaluate each category as well. So let's talk about how do we count observations. An observation, remember, is safe or unsafe, and multiple observations make up an inspection. So let's talk about the hard and fast rule. The easiest rule is people parts. For each people or part that you see, it's one observation. So I call it a 1-to-1 ratio. For every hard hat I see or don't see, that's one observation. For every electrical cord that I see, right, that's one observation. For every crane, should I say crane component, right, or item under my crane checklist that I see, for each crane, that's one observation. So let me give you some examples. I come upon a crew working. There's 5 people on the crew. I'm looking at hard hats or head protection specifically. There's 5 people working. That could be 5 observations, whether they're safe or unsafe. Let's say they're all wearing the appropriate hard hat. That's 5 safe observations because I saw and evaluated, physically saw 5 people, so I could evaluate 5 safe or unsafe. If I see 5 electrical cords and I'm evaluating the ground prong on each electrical cord, each cord can be one observation. 5 cords, 5 observations. Pretty straightforward, right? Hand and power tools go that way. A lot of things go that way. But there are some things that don't fall into this nice little bucket of 1-to-1, right? I wish everything fell into this bucket. It'd make things a whole lot easier. But there's 2 things specifically that jump out, right, that you need to be aware of on how should we count these. One is measuring by system specifically, measuring length in systems or sections, right? So guardrail is a great one, right? You measure guardrail by system, right, or by section. Let's talk about that. Let's say I'm using cable, perimeter cable, right, and it's a 100-foot run of perimeter cable. So one connection on one end, one connection on another end, and it's a 100-foot cable. That is one system. From one end to the other is one system. If I undo one end, that affects the entire 100-foot run, right? If I take all the cable clamps off that top rung, that basically makes the entire run, that one system, fail, right? So that's one system is one observation, right? If I do sections, that would be like perimeter fencing. Each section of fence, right, from post to post, for example, that could be one observation. Walkways can be done by length. Each section of walkway can be one observation. So break up length, right, into systems or sections, right? Depending on how it's built, make a determination. Is this a system, right? Is it one observation? Because if you undo one end or invalidate one piece, it affects the whole, okay? So that's how you'd measure length, okay? Scaffolding is another great way to measure by section. You wouldn't count scaffolding, right? If you have 300 feet of scaffolding across a building, you wouldn't count that as one, right? You'd break it up into sections, right, and you'd count each section separately. Area is the last one, and things, you measure that by room or partition or by area. Things like housekeeping is measured by area, right? I typically do it by work area, but you can also do it by a physical area, right? Floor 1, room 1, right? Each room could be one observation, right? You'd evaluate housekeeping in that work area or in that physical location. Rebar caps is another one. If you're not in construction, it may not make much sense to you, but rebar caps are, before you pour concrete, you may have exposed rebar, which is an impalement hazard if you fall on it, right? It's these sharp pointed rods sticking up. You do not measure those individually. You measure it, I typically do it by pour area, right? You'd measure rebar caps by area, not by individual exposed rebar, okay? It's either safe or unsafe, right? If some exposed, then it's unsafe for that area, Okay. Lighting is another example of how you measure things by area. Okay. So use these counting rules to make sure that we're collecting observations consistently, right? So if I measure housekeeping, either safe or unsafe for the entire facility or the entire project, right, that doesn't do me a lot of good. If I can hone in on specific areas, then I can count the safe areas and then only report where the bad areas are, and I can specify the location for each unsafe observation so that I can then go back and track each of those unsafes back to that particular area. Okay? Now, when I find a safe observation, a safe is a safe is a safe. You can go in and put safe observation details. You can add comments and photos for safes. But the default is you click a button, it adds a safe, no other things are required. You don't have to add severity for safes. But as soon as you click unsafe, the next question that you have to answer is, what is the severity? So let's define the severity. Severity refers to the degree of risk associated with a behavior or condition, and it considers both the probability or likelihood that the event will take place or lead to an injury, and the potential consequences. How bad would that injury be? Okay, so we look at two things. So our default is you have 4 choices for severity. Okay, give me 1 second. I need to exit something. I keep beeping. Okay, so severity refers to the degree of risk with a behavior condition, the probability, and the potential consequences. So our default is we look at low, medium, high, and life threat. Okay, low, medium, high, and life threat. Those are our typical choices. Your organization may differ both in the terms, right? You may not use low, medium, high, and life threat. And you may have fewer than 4 choices. I know some organizations only have 2 choices, right? Low and high, for example. Most go with the default low, medium, high, and life threat. So I just want to make sure that you're clear on what that means. Can you guys, can you still hear me?
Yes, Carrie, I can still hear you, and I can still see your screen, too.
Okay, good. So let's talk about how you would evaluate low, medium, high, and life threat. So you look at the likelihood and the consequence. So this is basically a risk calculation. Every time you find an unsafe observation, right, you have to make, or the observer has to make a risk calculation. They have to determine the likelihood of this leading to an injury, right, as well as the potential consequence of that injury. So, for example, a low likelihood and a low consequence would be a low severity and safety net. A high likelihood, right, and a high consequence, right, high and high, would lead to a life threat or immediately dangerous to life and health severity finding within safety net. So let me jump to the next slide, and I'll make it a little bit easier so that we can talk about that. Severity is consequence times likelihood or probability, right? So let's define consequence, let's define likelihood. Let's start with consequence. A high consequence, right, is an injury that requires hospitalization or worse. Hospitalization is admitted to the hospital. Not going to the hospital. I can go to the hospital and get stitches, but I'm not going to be admitted to the hospital. That's different, okay? Hospitalization or worse, that would be like a fatality, okay? And then low would be require less than hospitalization. So even if we answer that one question, the consequence question, okay, that's going to help us in the long run. Now, let me put a little preamble to this. Do not go with worst case scenario, because any injury can lead to death, right? I get a splinter in my finger, and then it leads to an infection. I get blood poisoning, and I'm dead, right? Go with what you would typically see, right, on your, if you look at your incident investigation reports. For example, if I were to fall, slip, trip, and fall, same level, right, could it be hospitalization or worse? Yeah. Worst case scenario could be hospitalization or worse. But on average, what would you typically see for a slip, trip, and fall, right? It would typically be less than hospitalization. If that's the case, then you'd put a low consequence, okay? So let's talk about that. If you answer that one question, high consequence leads to a higher life threat choice. Low consequence leads to a lower medium choice, period. You answer the consequence question, you automatically get put into the top or bottom buckets. Then the likelihood, the higher the likelihood leads from a low to a medium, the higher the likelihood leads a high to a life threat, okay? So consequence for high and life threat are the same, right? Consequence for low and medium are the same. The only difference is one's more likely to lead to an injury than another, okay? So low likelihood is unlikely or remotely possible. High is certain or probable to lead to an injury. So if you don't have this, right, you can get this slide from your process improvement leader. You can get it from myself or from Kent, but we can share this with you. Some companies have made a little flashcard that they give out to their observers, and they have something like this on a flashcard laminated so that the folks can reference it when they go to make a risk calculation. So please bear that in mind. We want to have the right severities within the system. And some people are going to call it subjective. Somewhat, sure. Everybody looks at risk differently. But the important thing is we want to start assessing risk collectively, right? And we want to say what is acceptable risk within our organization. If a guy's not tied off, right, 20 feet in the air, no fall protection whatsoever, walking a beam, right, that's going to be a high consequence. If he were to fall, that could ruin his day, right, ruin everybody's day, okay? But if somebody puts that in as a medium, we need to know about that. Basically saying, hey, he thinks that's acceptable risk with minor consequences. That's a feedback opportunity, right, an opportunity to coach. We need to know that. You wouldn't know that until somebody puts down severity and you're able to go in and see, hey, how are they evaluating risk? Wow, that's pretty wild. Maybe I need to go talk to them, okay? So severity is consequence times likelihood. Determine your consequence, determine your likelihood, and it should fall in line with one of your choices. Okay? Here are some examples of higher life threat, meaning high consequence types of activities. Falls from an elevation, electrical, struck by, that would be struck by like a mobile equipment or a crane. Caught in between, that would be caught in between things like conveyors, things like moving parts, like pieces of machinery, things like that. And confined space, or should I say a lack of oxygen atmosphere or low oxygen atmosphere, okay? Or even a high oxygen explosive atmosphere, things like that. So find within your organization what are your high and life threat activities or tasks, what can people get really hurt by, and make sure you identify those as, hey, these are our high and life threat severity. You still want people to go in and make a judgment call, make that risk calculation so that they understand the risk behind the task, but have some ideas of, you know, what is typically low and medium, what is typically high and life threat. And then last is make sure that you're doing from a feedback standpoint, you're going in and evaluating. If people put in what you think is a higher life threat consequence, a higher life threat severity, and they're putting in as low or medium, that you have what we call a calibration or a feedback session with them. Go through this flow chart, right? Have them choose a likely outcome and then choose one of the likelihood question or statements, right? Figure out what the severity is, and then compare that against what they put in the SafetyNet. And if it's different, have the conversation and adjust it in SafetyNet so they understand, hey, that low should be a high, and here's why, right? So that when they see it the next time, they'll be able to assess it appropriately. People aren't going to automatically align with what you think the severity should be. This is a coaching opportunity. If you're not coaching, people will continue to put, you know, we call them the chicken littles, everything that they find is a higher life threat. And then we have the people, you know, the surfer dudes, they're like, yeah, nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing's ever bad. It's always a low or a medium. Okay? Make sure that you're giving this feedback. Okay? Now, here's the inspection strategy I talked about. This should be done at the what I call the project level. That could be a facility, areas within a facility. Basically, it says you're going in and making a determination. This could be weekly or monthly, for example. Develop an inspection strategy. Who should be doing inspections? Is it just the safety person? Is the safety person and the line supervisor? Is it the safety, the line supervisor, upper management, and the workers? And if so, did we define the expectations? Is it one a day? Is it one a week? Is it one a month? Have we determined that? Okay? Then let me jump to the next one. When are inspections done? Because if I go in and say, hey, everybody's got a weekly requirement, they're going to go out Friday afternoon and you know, 30 people had a weekly requirement Friday afternoon. I get 29 safety inspections all recorded on Friday afternoon. That leaves 4.5 days of snapshots or insight into my process that I failed to capture because I had nobody out there looking at it. Make sure the when is staggered, right, so that you have people out on a Monday, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to get observations, right, because inspections and observations are snapshots in time. If people aren't there to get the snapshots, you're going to miss it, right? What gets observed? There's two things that go into play here. What gets observed is the items on the checklist. Typically, the easier it is to observe, the more observations you're going to get. Meaning, hard hats and safety glasses and PPE, right, are going to get the most observations because it's the easiest to evaluate. The harder it is to evaluate, the fewer observations you're going to get. So my recommendation is look at your summary report. Make sure that you're looking at all the tasks and hazards. And if there's gaps, right, things we're not looking at, you assign focused inspections to go look at those to make sure we get those observations. In addition, typically a low number of observations can denote one or two things. One, people are gravitating toward the easy things. And two, they may not feel comfortable evaluating some of those higher expectation or higher cognitive evaluation type of hazards, like electrical and fall protection and things like that. It may require some coaching, right? Go in, train people what to look for with electrical, train people what to look for fall protection, and you may not need the whole category of fall protection. Choose a line item, a subcategory within fall protection, go in, evaluate it, teach them how to look at that one thing, then have them go out and demonstrate it by gathering observations. Another what that gets observed is the observed party. For construction, that's typically a contractor. In manufacturing, that's typically a department or a line item, a line, meaning workers who do a particular assembly line. Make sure that those groups get observed. Maintenance is another group that typically gets overlooked, right? Who are those mobile workforces? You want to make sure each of those workforce or work groups get evaluated, right? You should be assigning observations to an entity, an observed party, right? So if you have an organization, you don't want it all going to, you know, Acme Construction. You want to know which group within Acme Construction or within Acme Manufacturing to assign those observations to. Why? So that each supervisor within that observed party can get just their data so that they can share it with their people and make changes as necessary. Okay? And then where are inspections needed? Typically, a project or a facility is huge. You want to break up your areas into bite-sized chunks that make sense so that you can evaluate them and see which areas have we looked at and which ones haven't we. And does it make sense we're getting more inspections in these areas, but we're doing more work and higher risk in these areas. Maybe we need to change our focusing and look at these areas more often. These expectations should then define, when I run reports, does it meet with my inspection strategy, right, yes or no? And now I have expectations around my data, and now my data starts to make sense because I have expectations around it. Otherwise, I look at data, right, in a report, and I nod my head going, yep, those are some numbers. What do they mean, right? It's hard to make meaning out of something you have no expectations around. So define the number of inspections per area ahead of time. Define when are inspections done, what days of the week, by who's doing inspections and how often, what's the frequency. And then what gets observed? What are they going out and looking at? Do you have people assigned to focused inspections? And are we going out and evaluating each work party? Make those determinations ahead of time. Throw a number down and say, can we meet this number this month? And then evaluate it and see, yeah, we did, and here's what the data is telling us. Is that enough? No, I think we need to look at it more. Or, hey, I think it's enough, let's back off a little bit. So before people go out and do inspections, define what that inspection means, right? Is it a focused inspection? Is it a general inspection? How long do you expect them to go out and do evaluations, right? If you have no set expectations ahead of time, if you haven't evaluated and studied your data to identify gaps or trends of what we need to focus on, at the very least, fall back to what I call inspect the pyramid, right? Start with the highest hazard first, right, and then go with the high frequency second. So at least you're evaluating the highest risk, right, and not looking at hard hats and safety glasses. Okay, if you want to prevent injuries, remember that's the purpose of SafetyNet. We want to prevent injuries. Then I'd rather prevent injuries on a higher hazard, right, before I go and prevent, hey, guy's not wearing safety glasses, right, or a guy, you know, he's not even in a work area. Okay. So a couple of things on the process. Only document what you observe. Do not estimate or record unless you physically observe it. I'll give you a great example. If you go out and see 10 people working, you can put 10 observations. But if there's a huge project and let's say there's 1,200 people working, I don't want you at the end of the day to go back and say, hey, I had 1,200 safe hard hats and 1,200 safety glasses, right? Because I didn't see anybody not wearing their safety glasses. You can't do that. If you physically saw 1,200 people, then sure, document it. Be my guest. But if you didn't physically see and evaluate each one, don't guesstimate. Okay? The next thing is you want to look at both work practices and work conditions. Both lead to incidents, and make sure you're observing both. You don't have to have a specific behavior-based checklist or a specific condition-based checklist, right? Fall protection is a great example, right? If you see people working exposed to falls, right, you can go out and see, are they tied off, are they wearing their harness, you know, those are behaviors. But you can look at the conditions too, right? Everything from guardrails, the passive systems to proper anchorage points and things like that. So you want to look at practices and conditions. I give another great example of scaffolding. Before you go on scaffolding, you have to evaluate it, make sure it's safe. That's a condition. But when people work on scaffolding, they could overcome those safety barriers, take the guardrail down, move planks around, things like that. And those behaviors, you know, basically defeat the safety within the scaffold. So you want to make sure you're not looking at just the conditions, you're not looking at just the behaviors, you're looking at both. Now, remember I said an inspection is a collection of observations. One or more observations minimum. You can't have 0 observations. But there are no maximum. It could be 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000 observations. Okay? On average, we see about 50 to 60 observations per inspection. That's looking at the entire data set. Obviously, focus inspections will probably yield fewer observations than a general inspection. Okay? Best practice. You want to get the data into the system as quickly as possible. That's the only way to receive real-time leading indicators to prevent future issues. You can set it up to automatically email to the observed party, automatically email to the project team or the facility team. You can have it automatically go to the safety folks. You can have alerts go off. If you wait and put the data in at the end of the day or the end of the week even, then you're kind of missing the point of real-time information. Best way to do that, enter it in on the mobile device. Second best, if you are doing it on paper, sit down that day and put it into the system. Okay. The next thing, what we typically see, here's how an inspection starts. I go out and I find unsafe observations. Let's say there's 3 guys not tied off, all right? They're all 3 walking a beam, no fall protection whatsoever. So that's 3 high or light threat observations, unsafe, right off the bat, 3 unsafe. But my percent safe, I haven't found any safe yet, is automatically 0%. I went to school, 0% is a huge goose egg, that's a failure. So then I go out and count 97 hard hats and safety glasses. 97 safe, 3 unsafe, that's 97% safe. I'm now 97% safe. My report goes out, somebody in operations sees that, hey, I'm 97% safe, no problem. I just had 3 unsafes in fall protection that were life-threatening and 97 hard hats and safety glasses and PPE that were safe. So PPE is 100% safe, fall protection is still 0% safe, right? So percent safe is not a score or a measure of risk, especially in a single inspection report. Percent safe is a great long-term measurement. It's great at the category level, but it's not great when you're comparing apples and oranges, multiple categories within an inspection. Okay? So make sure people understand what percent safe means and what it does not mean. Okay? Be more concerned about what was observed, how detailed the information in the system is, how quickly it was corrected, both in the field and in SafetyNet. Okay? And then take time to observe real work practices, right? Don't go counting PPE just to fill in to get a better score because that's what's expected of you. Okay? Remember, we want action and prevention, right? Not appearance-based safety to make it look like we're doing good when we may not be, or we need to highlight a particular area for a reason. Right? It's all about action and prevention and shining that spotlight. Okay? The next thing is if you observe something and correct it, meaning you observed it and corrected because it was unsafe or at risk or, you know, it's an opportunity for improvement, you still want to put it in the system as an unsafe observation, right? Or whatever that red bucket is for you guys, whatever term you use. Why? I walk by a guy's not wearing safety glasses, I tap the side of my face, didn't even say anything to him. He puts the safety glasses right on there, hanging around his neck. Why should I put that in SafetyNet? Because you can't trend what you can't see. If I didn't put it in SafetyNet, I walk away, somebody comes behind me, sees him not wearing safety glasses, does the same thing, and that happens 4 or 5 times in a day or within a week, right? I'd never know it because I never logged it. If you see it and correct it, put it in as an unsafe, but just say it was corrected immediately. No harm, no foul, no need to follow up. But if you start to develop a trend, then you know you need to go back and adjust for a root cause, right? The next thing, too, is plan for observations. What typically happens is I'm going to go out and look at the easiest things to look at so I can check the box. Say I did an inspection, I can go back to work or, you know, get my name in the hat to earn a gift card, right? You have to plan for accident prevention, meaning you have to go out and look at things you might not, you know, want to go look at or think to go look at. So don't lose an opportunity to capture information. Go look at the maintenance team, that mobile work crew, right? Go out and look at tasks and hazards that haven't been looked at enough. Or if you have somebody on site for a short time, or if you have an infrequent or short duration task, a confined space entry, right? Or tying in live voltage electrical, or working on electrical, lockout, tagout, for example. These are great opportunities if you know about maintenance activities or these out-of-the-box, non-daily tasks. You want to make sure you have somebody there. They're evaluating ahead of time, make sure everything's safe. Now, let's talk about how you can perform inspections. You can utilize a handheld or a smartphone, that's preferred, Apple and Android. Wireless synchronization, it's done offline, you sync it when you have access to Wi-Fi. Or you can do it manually, put it on a piece of paper, print out a document from the checklist, document from SafetyNet of the checklist, and then you have to log into a computer, use the online interface. So I'm going to show you that here in a second. The website navigation. In order to log into SafetyNet, this is also your server name, it's typically your company.predictivesolutions.com. Don't type www, just do company.predictivesolutions.com. So if I'm Giant Construction, for example, it's giant.predictivesolutions.com. Okay? That gets you to the login screen. You'll put in a username and a password, and then you'll get into SafetyNet. And that's where I'm about to go. Some resources that are available after today's call. There's a user resources link on the online interface. I'm going to show you that in just a second. Each company has a process improvement leader, right? Somebody like myself to help you navigate SafetyNet. Also, we have a great support network. There's an 800 number you can call. There's a support email you can call. You can contact them via email, and it generates a ticket that we follow up on. Or you can go to our website as well. Okay? So I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to jump over to the website. So I went in, for example, I go to giant.predictivesolutions.com. This is our, so I put in my username, and I put in my password. So you should have your username and your password. Okay? When you log in, you'll come to the dashboard like this. Once you're in here, if you want to enter an inspection, which is I'm about to do, you go under inspections and simply put add inspection. And all inspections ever done are found under find inspection. But I want to highlight this user resources button right here. The only way to access this user resources button is if you log into SafetyNet and you click on this button. I'm going to do it right now so I can show you these resources. The things that I'm talking about today are under this data collection section. Okay? So a lot of the things I talk about, there's a video on why we collect safe observations, how to count observations, how to determine severity. This SafetyNet field guide is a couple, 2-3 page document. If you're doing training within your organization on how to do SafetyNet for new users, print this field guide out, give it to them. It talks about everything I talked about today, and it's in like 2 or 3 page condensed version. Okay? There's also how to do inspections on an Apple, how to do one on Android, videos and tutorials. Okay? Meaning PDFs you can print out, videos you can watch. Okay? There's also other things besides data collection. There's reporting, all kinds of things like that. But the things I covered today are under data collection. And again, to get there, you click on this user resources link once you log into SafetyNet. Okay? So the next thing, I'm just going to walk you briefly through how to do an inspection online to kind of talk about some of the things that I talked about. How we start an inspection is you have to say, where are you? So this is a project in construction. It could be a location, an area, a group, a department in manufacturing, whatever your term is, okay? You go in, you say, where am I? If you know the name of it, you can start typing it and you'll see it. You can also hit browse and go find the area you're looking for, right? And I can go in, say this is where I am, and start my inspection. Does the time and a date stamp, does that on the mobile devices as well. Says who you are, right? But I can change that if I wanted to, right? Give credit to somebody else if I wanted to. Start my inspection. There's a reviewed with paid text field and inspection level comments field if you wanted to add those, not necessary. Next, you determine the checklist. You can have more than one checklist in SafetyNet, right? And we can turn on and off who sees what checklist. I'm going to stick with the safety checklist right now. Then you say, who am I observing, right? What company or group or contractor, observed party, whatever you're assigned to. Some in manufacturing do lines, right? Because each line has a group of workers, okay? So I'm going to collapse the categories. Within a checklist, you have categories, like PPE. Within a category, you have subcategories. To add a safe, you just click on the green, right? This goes for mobile devices as well. You just click it, right? Each time you click the green or the red, you add a safe observation. You can have multiple. If you click and hold on a mobile device or do Control plus click on online, you can do what we call Safe Plus, which is you can go in and put comments for a safe, right, and or a photo for a safe. Okay? These arrows mean you can edit them. You can edit or delete on mobile as well. Okay? These arrows or click and hold on a mobile device, you can go in, you can edit or delete a safe or an unsafe observation. When you hit an unsafe observation, it automatically does a pop-up. You can see one of the things that we ask is the severity, whether or not it's corrected. You can say, yes, it's corrected immediately. No means it's not corrected. You give it a due date, and then we track it as an open issue in a separate report. Go in and put comments here. You can put a photo, save and close. And now I have a running total, safe and unsafe observations. Okay? You can jump from category to category. You can even jump from one observed party. I'm now looking at a different observed party, jump to a new category, and start collecting observations there. So as long as I'm on the same, what we call the project or department or whatever that is for your group, for your company, as long as I haven't left this area, this location, I can change checklists, I can change observed parties, I can change items, category within my checklist. Okay? And when you're done, right, it's automatically saved, right? Go to Find Inspection up here. It would automatically be found as the last one that was done. Go in, you can see that's the one that I started doing. And anytime I could go to the inspection report, email it, go back into the inspection and continue editing if I wanted to. So that's the premise, right? Inspections, you're adding a new inspection. You're saying where are you, right? And then you're adding observations, right, that are either safe, unsafe, right, that are either safe or unsafe, right? Safe, the tool's in good condition. Unsafe or at risk or whatever term you use means it's not in good condition, right? How bad is it? That's your severity, right? Whether or not it's corrected, do we need to follow up on it? What are the details, right? Details are important, okay? That's all I have as far as my demonstration and my review of the topics pertinent to data collection. So now I'm going to have Kent read out any questions from our chat to see if there's anything that you may need questions or clarified.
Yeah, use your chat at the top right corner of your screen, and we can answer a couple of questions. We're running out of time. We did receive one question about that laminate idea. So we'll send out slides as well as a recording of this session, so so you all will have that. Otherwise, Carrie, thank you for your time. It's very informative. And if again, we're going to have a next webinar on April 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then don't forget the customer conference coming up in Nashville on October 3rd through the 5th. If we do not have any further questions, we'll sign off for now. Thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you.